Thank you for joining us for a clinical trials update presentation entitled Patient Participation in Clinical Trials, Reneo Pharmaceutical. Presenting today will be Dr. Madhu Davies. Dr. Davies is a medical director of Reneo Pharmaceuticals. And before we begin, we do have some housekeeping items for you to review. For viewing this webcast, it is best that you select side-by-side mode under viewing options at the top of your screen so that this webcast fits on your screen. Also, we have muted the lines, so if during this webcast you have a question, please use the Q&A button to type in your question so that we can get answers for you. We also ask that you keep your questions focused on the topic of this webcast. If you need closed captioning, follow the instructions on the screen to enable or turn it off. Looking ahead, next month, our October topic for Ask the Mito Doc will be a synopsis of scientific information presented at Mitochondrial Medicine 2021. So we ask that you mark your calendars for October the 12th, 3 p.m. West, and watch your email and social media for ways to register and ways to submit your questions. And we will also have an additional coming up Ask the Mito Doc webcast, getting physical in the fall and winter months on Wednesday, November the 3rd. So we invite you to mark your calendars for that as well. We also would like to direct you to our coronavirus resource webpage for updates, specifically about the distribution of vaccines and boosters and the impact on our patient community. Also, we have past webcasts that are focused on COVID-19, and they are posted here as well. While Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week is underway, there are many ways that you can participate, from changing your social media profile picture to reposting facts and information on the UMDF social media channels, to sharing your story of your own personal journey. So we ask you to visit umdf.org and get details today before the week is out. Also, make sure you check out MitoU. This is a great resource for our patient families and for our scientific and medical community. It provides you with helpful information on the diagnosis, treatments, and we will continually be updating informational videos for your viewing, including the archives of these webcasts. We have several new initiatives that we will launch this fall for our patient community. So we'll ask you to look for the launch of MitoShare, UMDF's patient-driven registry. The goal of the registry is to advance scientific research using data gathered from patients and families affected by mitochondrial disease. And with every new registry participant, we gain a better understanding of the disease, which in turn facilitates diagnoses, treatments, and cures, and improved standards for clinical care. We will also be launching a new and easy-to-use clinical trials finder on the UMDF website, and look for the UMDF Genetic Testing Project. It's a collaborative initiative to provide qualified candidates of all ages a complimentary genetic test. We are excited about these programs, and we hope you watch for them in the coming weeks. We are also encouraging you to participate in Mitochondrial Medicine 2022. We hope to be live in Phoenix, so take a look at your calendar and save the dates. We would love to be able for you to join us coming up in June. We also want to let you know about another one of the important programs UMDF has provided for 25 years, and that's patient support. We can connect you to one of our 90-plus ambassadors around the country, or through one of our hundreds of support meetings throughout the year. So please reach out if you need support, and contact us at 888-900-6486. Also, we've got a number of meetings that occur throughout the month that we would invite you to participate in. They are all listed on the UMDF calendar, so we invite you to go and look and participate in these virtual support meetings. Our fall Energy for Life walkathons are underway. Walk your way this fall safely. Find a walk location near you and walk your way at energyforlifewalk.org. And coming up on October 2nd, we're asking everyone to join us in our National Energy for Life Walk 5K You can run or walk your way, and we invite you to register today. But for now, let's get things started with this webcast, and we will turn things over to UMDF Science and Alliance Officer, Dr. Philip Yeske, who is our moderator for this webcast. Phil?
All right, Cliff, thanks very much. I mean, lots of important updates. Really exciting to be here with you during World Mitochondrial Disease Week. When I think about some of those research initiatives that were listed that we're working towards, a global patient registry, a clinical trial finder, a genetic testing program, all of those are towards a goal of facilitating clinical trials for mitochondrial disease. So we're really fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Davies from Reneo Pharmaceuticals, who's going to talk to us in a bit more detail about the role of the patient in clinical trials. As we've said on all of these webinars and various forums where we've discussed this topic, absent patient engagement, we won't get to treatments and cures. The treatments and cures we also desperately want for mitochondrial disease. So with that as a background, Dr. Davies, I'm going to invite you to join on camera and to share your screen, and we can begin your presentation. And for our audience, again, please submit questions. Dr. Davies and I are happy to address those at the end of the presentation. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit those questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. Apologies in advance if we can't get to all of them, but we'll do the best we can to address as many as possible. All right, Dr. Davies, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you very much to you and the rest of the organisers for inviting me to speak today. It's a huge privilege, and I'm particularly pleased that it's occurring in World Mitochondrial Disease Week, which feels very apposite, so thank you. So Reneo is my employer. I'm a medic who's been working in rare diseases for a number of years, and for various reasons I was delighted to find myself employed by Reneo, and we'll come back to some of that later on in the presentation. If I can advance the slides. So the first thing I need to tell you about Reneo is that the company has a very clear mission, and that's to address the major challenges of patients with genetic metabolic myopathies, as you can read on the slide, by making people feel better through improving endurance, fatigue, and general well-being. So that's quite a big ask, really, but we're very committed to this, and we really want to make that difference. And that's part of the reason why I'm so pleased to be invited to speak today, because we're all on the same mission here to get this done so that people can feel better. The organisers have very kindly asked me to talk about patient participation in clinical trials. This is a subject that's very close to my heart, as you'll also hear as we go through the presentation, and there'll be a bit of a thread going through that. The picture here on the right-hand side shows you how we used to treat tuberculosis. It was a condition with very little hope. Patients would be sent to sanatoriums where they'd be put in beds in the fresh air. And yes, you really can see the open air side of this pavilion where patients would be nursed and really have very little energy and very little strength. And then things changed. Drugs started to become developed, and people started to think, is it enough just to say this might work, or should we do some sort of test to see if it's better than nothing before subjecting people to having this medicine? And so it's only 70 odd years, but in 1948, the first modern trial, randomized controlled double-blind trial, was conducted, and it was of streptomycin in the treatment of tuberculosis. So that's a big jump. 70 years might seem like quite a long time to some of you, but when we're looking at millennia, thousands of years of empirical treatment where people ground up herbs or tried to make concoctions to make people feel better. And if they got a few people better, everybody was very happy. Through the thousands of years to 1948, the world changed. And that's the world which we've picked up, all of us, and that's the world in which we're operating now. But we want to improve things and take them forward. And the reason for that is, in my view, is that patients have always been done to as clinical research subjects, which doesn't sit well with me and doesn't sit well with my peers either. because this should be about participation. This should be about, we've found molecules, we've invented potential drugs, but we need to develop them with patients. And therefore, that leads to the question, what else can patients do apart from just participate in clinical trials, which of course is hugely important, but there's so much more there. There's so much more potential for a true participation and engagement. And so, as you can read on the slides, for those of you who are able to do that, drug development, people like me, patients, the regulatory authorities, FDA is very keen, payers, all sorts of other stakeholders, everybody's beginning to talk. It's still quite early days and people are still quite just building relationships and finding a way through this. So this is a really exciting time for us all. I think over time and in the near future, we will have a very much a fully integrated approach to all of this, where everybody's joined up and we have timely involvement of patient groups and other stakeholders in the drug development process, rather than getting to the end of a drug program and then people saying, well, it would have been useful if you'd done this. So hopefully we'll be understanding and learning in stream and building all of this in. And for me, this is all about what Phil talked about. It's about getting good drugs to patients in a timely fashion, and also the right drugs to patients in a timely fashion. And that's the thing that we all need, isn't it? We can't wait forever. We need things to happen now. So I'm absolutely straight up. Pharma is brilliant at the science. We have some incredible talents developing all sorts of molecules or biologicals for all sorts of things. And that's great. But in the main, most people working in pharma don't have the particular conditions that are being looked at for treatment and don't really understand that burden of the disease. And that's a particularly important area where patients can fully participate and engage here, because you have unique perspectives based on your lived life every single day. And your carers also have some perspectives as well on what living with these conditions might mean. That's really important because it identifies knowledge gaps, and actually something that some clinical endpoint that pharma is chasing from a medical perspective may not be the thing that bothers any of you. And so it's really important that your knowledge and your information helps inform the research approach. I think something that's changed massively over the last 20 years or so has been, of course, our access to the internet. There is absolutely no reason now, and again, we saw earlier in the introduction how United Disease Mitochondrial Foundation itself is providing massively high quality information on the disease area to patients, and there are obviously other sources, but I would always recommend that people go to a quality source like UDMF that you can trust. And there's no reason why patients can't be very fully informed about their condition and about any progress that's being made there, and all sorts of different perspectives. And of course, patient advocacy groups like UMDF are our friend mutually, and the internet is a source of information, but be careful what you read. Because of all of this increased information and increased awareness of what can be done, I think patients understand and expect more from their experience participating in clinical trials, and quite right to. Interestingly for me, the regulators have always been very hard-nosed about this and want a very definite endpoint that's measurable in numbers and changes. But they're now much more interested in the patient's experience, which we do also measure in patient-reported outcomes with numbers, and we do look for changes, but it's about how you feel or how you function, rather than, say, taking your blood pressure or something else that several people could replicate in one go. And for me, that's a massive shift in thinking and how we develop drugs. So as I said on the very last bullet, basically we've gone from hard rational science without really thinking about the actual patients who might be taking the drugs and what they might want, through to a situation where we're very aware of that now, and we've realised just how important that is and how much attention we ought to have been giving to it over the last 70 odd years. So again, I'm going to re-emphasise this because I'm all about the win-win scenario. If we can all gain from something, why would we not do it? So hopefully, if we have better patient insights, patients participating in studies will have a better experience. Therefore, that will increase the interest of the patient population in participating in studies. So we might be able to run the studies and recruit them faster. And then that way we'll get good drugs to market, and patients will be actually able to get their prescriptions for these if that's appropriate when we've done the studies and if the drugs have worked. So that patient perspective really, really matters all through the thread that I've been explaining over the last few slides, but ultimately as the driver to getting medicines to patients who need them. I'm really optimistic about this, and I'm a great believer that this is the way forward, but I'm also a realist, and there is a gap, I'm afraid. And that gap comes between aspiration of all the things I want to see done that you've just been hearing about and the reality. And this is going to improve. This gap will close as we all learn to do this. But there is an issue sometimes about which models of engagement are best for patients and caregivers, sponsors, so forth, and indeed staff at the site. How is this going to work? We also need to understand really where the partnership can add value and what is wasting a patient's time, frankly. And patients are going to be the ones who tell us that. And then, of course, we need to work within the guardrails. So these things are going to help us close the gaps. And I think we have a lot to do to facilitate participation by patients in this engagement process. And I'm coming to that in a moment. So it's absolutely clear to me, every pharma company I've worked for in the last few years understands this, but what we're struggling with is how to do it. And so the need for, and the value and the importance of patient participation is definitely recognised now, but it's about how to do it, as I was saying, the frameworks that we need to put in place to make sure that this partnership is effective. And as I say, very critically, not wasting patients' time and energy. And also we need people to lead the experience and the engagement activities. Now, I was very pleased to have found that when I got to Reneo, this was already happening. And I know that many of you have already interacted with my colleague, Wendy, who very strongly leads on the experience and engagement activities. And many of you have already helped us with the design of our studies, thanks to this engagement. So I think that's fantastic. We also need to bear in mind the guardrails, which keep the patients safe and stop us, make sure that there's no grounds for patients feeling that they're being exploited or that they're doing too much to help us. And that really comes under the official remit of the institutional review boards, who do have to approve the majority of our activities. But I'd like to think we wouldn't put anything up for review that wasn't sensible and appropriate in the first place. And then the other things, of course, that you need to facilitate any partnership, be it in pharma or otherwise, are thinking about timing and about the budget and about the fact that one cookie cutter approach will not do it. We need to make a bespoke have a bespoke approach for every single program that we develop, and it's not going to be the same across therapy areas or indeed across studies for one therapy area necessarily, depending on what it is that we're all trying to achieve. So essentially, in order for a pharma to turn around and partner well with patients in the setup of these studies, which does involve design and execution, we've got to do our bit. We've got to invest the time, the thought, the effort, and as you can read, people and resources into building these collaborations. And I absolutely do not underestimate what it takes to do this, and that we need to probably invest more as an industry in this as well. As I say, people are learning, so bear with us as we're trying. If we get this right, once again, I think this is a win-win, because the people who benefit will be patients, and I will have a happy life developing drugs successfully. So that's makes me happy too. I talked about the gap between a reality and aspiration. Now I'm going to be slightly more downbeat and talk about the downsides of all of this. And the main one for me is that every year for Christmas, I ask for a magic wand and a crystal ball, and they don't arrive. So it is sometimes the case that there are unreasonable expectations, and I don't have a magic wand to fix that. We just have to come, as in any relationship, there sometimes just has to be an understanding about what is actually doable. Sometimes there is a lack of alignment. A patient group may have a very clear need and agenda, which we simply cannot meet. And it's not because we don't want to, it's often because we simply cannot do it within the remit of being a pharma company. There is something at the moment, there's a bit of flavour of jumping on the bandwagon, and I think it's very important to avoid that. As I've already said, many of you have partnered with Reneo already to help us with the design of our studies and with input to other important aspects of that. And so I hope you know that we are very much not on a bandwagon. We're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. And above all, it takes time and consistency. This isn't a dipping in and dipping out relationship. It's got to be something that we all work at long term. And as you all know, successful friendships require energy and effort, and this will be no different. I thought it might be useful to give you some flavour of how this has worked in the past from my experience working in the pharmaceutical industry. So these are not all examples from the mitochondrial community, which I only joined nearly 2 years, but not quite ago. So some of these are from before that. Thinking in particular about my work with paediatric epilepsy, we looked very carefully at how we could learn from the patients to design surveys to understand disease burden across the population. And then we took what we learned from those surveys into the design of our clinical trials. And I'm happy to say that those trials were successful. And the particular medicines that I was working on at the time are now available to patients, which is very warm feeling. It gives me a very warm feeling and makes me very happy. Looking specifically here, though, in the mitochondrial community, we had a lot of work done between Wendy and representatives of the fatty acid oxidation disorder community, who helped us design some natural history studies, which are ongoing at the moment. And again, I'm very grateful to those of you who participated. And above all, I think what I've learned from this is we really need to nail the unmet need, the thing that matters to the patients, the thing that they want to move on the dial and get better. Examples where of work we've done with patient groups as well is in the development of patient-reported outcomes. And many of you, again, have helped us develop the patient-reported outcome measure that we are using in our current primary mitochondrial myopathy study, as well as in our other studies in the different disease areas. And again, a big thank you to you all for participating. This goes back to my theme of what is it that matters to the patient. So we can ask you about symptoms and about impact on physical, emotional, and social functioning. And then we can try and parlay that into questions that we can have reviewed by the regulators as a question set to see if they think that this will be valuable and they'd be prepared to accept it as evidence of drug effect. And that's really helpful because we can then tailor what's going on to patient therapy. We can help improve that dialogue between the patients and the physicians. And then hopefully at the end of all of this, the quality and the performance of the studies and the drug itself ultimately will be improved. So that's the goal and the aspiration. If we get all of that right, of course, then quality and performance in patients' lives should improve too. And that, of course, is the big goal, isn't it? Another example of that I found incredibly helpful in the past when I was working in neurology in the various epilepsy areas was education. The amount I learnt listening to patients, to expert patients who were prepared to give freely of their time and their knowledge and their understanding of the condition was phenomenal. And historically, I've worked with patient groups on advisory boards, which have really helped us nail that clinical trial design, and on outcome measures, as I've just discussed. Another area that's been really useful is having patients look over patient information sheets for studies. And I know, again, some of you have helped us with that with our STRIDE study that I'll be coming to shortly. We have certain things that we're obliged to include, but have we put them in a way that people actually understand? Does it make sense to a patient? And is this 29-page leaflet simply too cumbersome? So again, a big thank you to those of you who've helped us with that. Sometimes I think a really useful outcome from patient participation with the work that we're doing in pharma is reaching a point where we can have a mutual discussion of what counts as benefit to the patient group and what counts as risk to that patient population. And each illness will have its own different set of benefits and risks. So what is acceptable to you? And if a patient community wants a drug that has no adverse effects, that's unrealistic, because if the drug is working, there will be some adverse effects, sadly. It might want a drug that has absolutely no impact on their life apart from making their disease better. But again, that's not possible really, in that we have to take the medicine or have the medicine administered in some way. So there's going to be some impact, even if it's as minimal as that. It may be that we're all looking for stabilization of disease, or it may be that some people are looking for improvement. And all of these things are in the mix and all need to be discussed so that there's a common understanding of what the endpoint goal looks like. And the things that I might think are reasonable trade-offs or a regulator might think are reasonable trade-offs may not be the trade-offs that patients and their families wish to make. And we've seen that in the past with HIV therapies, where patients were prepared to take a whole barrel load of adverse effects if it meant they stayed alive and had a quality of life. And we see that in oncology and epilepsy to some degree as well. The benefits of the drug are definitely outweighing a very large number of side effects that these patients are prepared to put up with. And that's what I mean about examples of different benefits and different risks. Things that I might not like written down might be perfectly acceptable to a patient if it means their epilepsy is under control, they can start driving again, they can see their grandchildren more regularly, whatever it might be. A really important example that I'm going to come to now, of course, is of patient participation is through the advocacy partnerships. And of course, this is a very real and live example here in this meeting today and run by this foundation. I'll start historically. HIV treatments, I think, really started to move the dial. The patients were very vocal. They knew what they wanted. And as I've just said, they were prepared to say, regulators, we accept these side effects if it means that we're going to get our lives back. And so that really started to make people think about patient engagement. There were a number of examples, but more recently and more proximal perhaps to this community, there was a big workshop for Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 2016. And then backing slightly to 2014, there was a very significant stakeholder workshop run by the National Institutes of Health. And they looked at all aspects of mitochondrial disease, ranging from nutrition through to how could we all work better together. And then, of course, I must not leave out the UMDF patient-led drug development meeting, which occurred in 2019, sadly, just before I joined, so I missed it. But having read the minutes, this was an enormously important meeting in bringing all sorts of stakeholders together. And for me, from the minutes, one of the most telling aspects was the commentary from the FDA assessor who attended the meeting and had his eyes opened in terms of the burden on disease on patients, in terms of the number of drugs they need to take, the fact that there is really nothing that's approved, and therefore everybody's trying to find their own cocktail that works, and the burden on a day-to-day basis of what it means to have a mitochondrial disorder. So perhaps off to UMDF for hosting that and bringing it to fruition. I've really enjoyed working in a collaborative environment for at some time now in my previous roles, as I say, in pediatrics and neurology and so forth. And I'm really enjoying working with the mitochondrial disorder family here as well. But there are some things that I've learned that I need to make sure I carry on doing. And most important one of those really, as in many relationships, I think, is listening. I need to listen really carefully, and I need to hear what's being said, not what I think is being said, which is often very different. So I need to be brave sometimes and ask questions which you might think are really, really silly, but they'll be because I haven't understood. So be patient with me, please. And I need to understand what the partnership needs at this time, because that's going to change with time, like any other partnership, isn't it? And do our expectations align? As I've said to a previous slide, sometimes they don't, and then we have to be honest. Sometimes we simply cannot deliver what a patient group might want us to deliver because we're a pharma company and we have certain parameters. But there are lots of ways for fruitful engagement to occur, and they're all around building relationships. And if we build those relationships, then patients participate very constructively, for example, in focus groups, in interviews, on patient platforms and networks, and advisory panels, many of these things I've mentioned earlier. And I think that's been incredibly helpful in my experience when trying to develop new drugs. Increasingly, we have some tools and we should use them. The regulators, as I've mentioned, are really softening is not quite the right word, but beginning to understand just the importance of the patient perspective here now, how your disease makes you function, how it makes you feel, and how drugs impact that. And so that they are very keen on us finding these things out and currently reporting them back via patient-reported outcome. And I think everybody is really, really conscious of the tensions in rare diseases where patients have very limited treatment opportunities and research opportunities, and any patient who steps forward to participate in a trial or be involved in a focus group or an ad board or review patient literature, that patient's showing real altruism towards others. And again, a big thank you for that. Really mean it. We have to build trust. Most of this slide is going to be self-explanatory based on what I've already said. It's, we need to avoid any misunderstanding. So that's listening carefully, that's understanding what's possible. And we need to, where we don't agree, we need to be open and honest about that, own it and agree to disagree. And then everybody knows they can trust each other because they're always going to be straight. In the ideal scenario, we would all under promise, of course, and we'd all over deliver like mad, and that would be brilliant. And for me, one of the key things is just saying, I don't know sometimes, which is actually quite common in rare disease areas because nobody knows and there's nowhere to go and find the answer. We have to do the research to find that answer. And sometimes we just have to say so. So I think for me, this slide really summarises what it is that I think that patient participation brings. It's a massive amount that patient participation brings to the table. I've discussed so many positives, but it's really fundamental, I think, to reducing burden on patients and to actually making sure that we focus the questions to ask the right question and therefore undertake meaningful and impactful drug development, which therefore would get the right medicines to the right patients at the right time. And that's critical to me. And I really believe in this. So I think it's an all hands in together and everybody there working together for the same common goal, which is what I've just iterated. So I think that really draws a line under the patients as partners piece that I wanted to talk to you about. And the organisers were kind enough to ask me to also just mention a little update on our ongoing study. So here's a study update on REN 001201, which we call in shorthand the STRIDE study, which is the little logo you've got there. And for those of you who want the full title, I'll be giving you that in a moment. I'm obliged, obviously, to give you the following disclosures, which you'll be used to seeing from every company that comes to talk to you. I can't tell you that the drug works because we have not yet established that. That is the point of the studies. That's probably the most important thing on this slide. And then, of course, also to tell you where you can find the information about it, which I have on several slides so that you know what's in the public domain. So the full title, you can see, is a mouthful. I won't even try to read it because I will no doubt stumble because I'm a little bit nervous talking to you all, but we're calling it the STRIDE study. It is published up on ClinicalTrialsgov, and here is the link to that website for those of you who want it. The study is recruiting grown-ups who are 18 years or over, because I appreciate in some states this can be 16. For us, it's 18, please. Patients need to have primary mitochondrial myopathy, which is defined by using the International Workshop criteria, which were published by Mancuso in 2017. For the moment, we're starting with defined mitochondrial defects because we've got to start somewhere. And this is a patient group that we think we can help are those who are characterized by exercise intolerance or active muscle pain. Critically, in order for us to assess exercise intolerance, patients do need to be able, or at least willing to give it a good go, a walking test. And they need to be able to do that independently without human beings helping them. But you can use a walking aid if that's necessary for you or what you do in everyday life. Women are eligible for the study, but if they have the potential to become pregnant, they do need to be using contraception. This is a little schematic chart of the design subjects I've already described and the outcome measures. So going back to that 1948 streptomycin trial, this is a multi-center, multinational, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So we want to see if our drug makes a difference compared to a non-active placebo. Importantly for this audience, we've got 9 sites in the USA. I would say again that this is active drug versus placebo, so there is a chance that you might go into the study and receive a dummy drug. And the study is for 6 months in length. The drug is taken by mouth and ideally with food. Subjects I've already described, and what we're looking at really is how we impact endurance and fatigue by looking at the distance walked at the beginning and distance walked at the end of the study. We're also assessing how patients feel, and that's through the changes in modified fatigue index scale and patient global impression of change, which are well-known patient-reported outcomes used in lots of other therapy areas, and linking those to ones that we've developed for primary mitochondrial myopathy, which are the exploratory endpoints, which will assess function and quality of life in this specific population. And of course, we're also checking for safety, and we'd like to understand in a larger patient population how the drug is absorbed and distributed and then excreted. So that's the kinetic endpoints. The frequently asked question is highly legitimate. Patients who are traveling for very long distances away from their homes, is our travel expenses covered? And yes, they are. If you'd like to know more about this study, please do visit ClinicalTrialsgov or indeed the UMDF website. And I think we're going to hand back to Phil now to moderate. But once again, I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today.
Thank you, Dr. Davies. That was a really interesting presentation, and you covered a lot of ground there on a number of topics. I'm just going to begin by again reminding our audience that you're welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A function. That's the button at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep an eye on that off to my right here. And while we wait for some questions to come in, Dr. Davies, maybe you and I could just discuss a couple aspects of your presentation. I think you very eloquently made the case for why patient involvement is so important in designing and executing clinical trials. It's all about not just moving a number on a piece of paper, some kind of lab result, but rather what's a change that's meaningful to the patient population. So you touched on a few ways that kind of partnership can be developed, but I wondered if you could maybe delineate a few of those. Like for instance, you talked about the patient-focused drug development meeting, where we gathered a lot of testimonial and a transcript, and that's a resource that's now available for all to use. But of course, every trial is unique. So what are some of the techniques or approaches that you use to engage patient populations to build off of what already exists?
So as you say, we're in the privileged position now that there is beginning to be some information out there, no, not least because of the work that UMDF has done, of course. And so what we can take from that in particular, and particularly the patient testimonies, is what it is that's bothering them on a daily basis, where it is they want to get to with therapy, because most people are very realistic about what might be a good improvement for them, whether it's something like being able to get down the aisles at Walmart without somebody else having to help them or without having to use artificial aids, or whether it's having enough energy to be able to stand up during a church service. It's going to be different for everybody, but we can take themes from what we see. And the key theme for us that seemed to come out of this meeting was around endurance and fatigue, and that the huge challenge that fatigue in particular seems to present. Because of course, if you're fatigued, you don't have the energy to then see if you can go any further. So those were really key learnings for us from that conference that you convened. Is that what you were driving towards?
Right. So I guess in addition to surveys or interviews like that, are there, oftentimes focus groups might be convened, right, as another typical way to try and, identify the group of patients that are most likely to benefit from a specific intervention, and then spend some time just understanding their needs. And, in this case, we know that mitochondrial myopathies are one of the most common symptoms experienced by mitochondrial disease patients. That's across a broad range of patients. So there was a great starting point, right, for understanding what do myopathies practically translate into? And you touched upon it, right? Endurance and fatigue. And, quite often, I think one of the major outcomes was understanding that we're not talking about fatigue like, I'm a little tired today, but this is really a deep-rooted, pervasive fatigue. And so getting to the root of that and understanding it really important from the patient perspective.
Absolutely agree. You mentioned focus groups there, and I would just like to say thank you to those in the community as well who helped us with the relatively recent focus group, where we were trying to determine how our medicine should be when if we, assuming all goes well, if we get a license, what is the medicine that the patients would like to receive? And that was incredibly illuminating, and our drug manufacturing colleagues attended that and gained enormous insight. So again, a big thank you to those who participated.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And right at the very beginning of your presentation, you made an important point that it's not just participating in the clinical trial. That's not the only way to participate in clinical research. So it is this upfront work of when meetings are being held, participating, sharing your journey with mitochondrial disease, and what's important to you are ways that even if you don't participate in the trial, you're adding to the patient voice. And I think since that meeting in 2019, this has become a really important component of our overall UMDF strategy, is to just continue to build that. I wondered if from your interactions with other disease communities, if you could share other ways going forward. Sometimes we've talked about perhaps gathering almost like patient testimonials on a rolling basis and putting them forward. But have you seen anything in other disease communities that's worked particularly well for building out that patient voice?
I think a couple of things that have worked particularly well have been first of all, encouraging patients to link and join to organisations like this, where they that can channel their voice appropriately, because we know where you are, but we don't know where individual patients are. Right. So that's why. So being found, that's really important. Mm-hmm. We had when I was working in paediatric epilepsy, we had a real challenge because the children's epilepsy syndromes were so bad that they were often non-verbal. So which I don't think we'd realised at the start. So we were genuinely setting out to try to talk to some of the children, obviously with their parents or caregivers' permission, but actually couldn't do that. And so the big learning for us was actually going a bit broader and actually encouraging the caregivers and the primary carers for these patients to also become much more involved than we had. So it was spreading the patient voice more broadly, if you like, to their advocates and to the people who could communicate on a daily basis with them and really did parlay what the patients would have told us to us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's very clear that burden of disease extends beyond the patient to the family unit, and understanding that is really important as well. And thank you for calling out registries as one way that a patient can make themselves discoverable, right?
Yes.
We need to bring you together. For sure. So we definitely want to advance that and make sure that we really have many patients well characterized scientifically, genotypically, phenotypically, but more important that we're engaging them and understanding what their disease journey means to them and what's meaningful to them. And so that's an ongoing partnership for sure. So it's easy to make the case that your goals in working for a drug development company and the patient goals are aligned, and that we want to get drugs to market that are meaningful for our patient community. the challenging entity or stakeholder that sits in the middle are the regulatory agencies like the FDA. And as you said, huge improvements, right, since the 1980s, and now with the 21st Century Cures Act, right, as well. But, are there any recommendations you can make in ways that true advocacy form? This is important to UMDF, and we interact with the FDA on an ongoing basis. But what can patients themselves do to really get that message across that the FDA needs to continue to demonstrate a flexibility in its overarching regulatory approach that emphasizes the needs and wants of the patients? Do you have any examples of just sort of one-off, what each patient themselves can do to try and influence the regulatory process?
So as you said, I personally believe that the regulators have moved a very long way and that things are very much better now in terms, particularly for rare diseases. I think it's difficult, isn't it? There's a balance between lots of us making a tiny little noise, right, or joining together, for example, under the aegis of the UMDF to make a big noise. But I think it doesn't hurt for us all to be making little noises as well and continuing to lobby our governors. I'm not very good on the political setup in America. As you probably hear, I'm not American. Well, but you will have people, representatives in government that you can lobby, and I think gaining a head of steam that way is certainly one way to do it. So it's coming in from a direction, right, a different direction to FDA, for example, who I do find very helpful. The FDA is very helpful, and they do try to do their best, but they have quite strict parameters, and that's what we need to help them adjust, I think. Yeah. So lobbying your politicians is a good place to start. And
always a very good place to start, as you said.
And joining together to lobby via organizations like UMDF is often very effective as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I think has been challenging over the past couple of years with the pandemic is we haven't been able to have our in-person day on the Hill where we bring as many patients and caregivers as possible to the legislators, try to arrange as many meetings as possible. Now, my colleague Cliff, who started today's webinar, has also organized a number of virtual meetings. And for those in the audience listening today, if you're interested, need help in reaching your representatives to be able to convey exactly that message of why this is important, that rare disease drug development requires a government that's willing to listen to its people and help bring these treatments to market, please reach out to UMDF and we'll help get you in contact with the right people. Really, really important. And one of the things we look forward to getting back to doing in person. Now, of course, I think the challenge is the words are important from the FDA side, but the actions, need to demonstrate that too. And certainly we've seen flexibility in some other disease communities, but there still remains that gap sometimes between the rigidity of traditional science, depending on the data, the efficacy and safety data, together with the patient voice. But it's good to hear that you're seeing more and more examples of where the patient voice is strongly influencing the regulators as well.
I think to be absolutely crystal clear, the regulators need to approve drugs that are safe and effective. And I think our question is, what does effective mean? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. We shouldn't ignore that there is a very important role for the FDA to protect the citizens of the United States and make sure that drugs are safe and effective. We don't want to diminish that, but developing drugs for a collection of rare diseases such as mitochondrial disease is very different from developing a drug for something like cardiovascular disease or a cancer, that's much more common. And I think this is where it remains an ongoing challenge, right, to find the right balance there. So one other interesting point that you made was that by engaging the patients, particularly in patient-reported outcomes, that an outcome of that would be improved clinician-patient communication. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, because this is actually an area we identified when we were running the mitochondrial disease community registry, our first registry. One of the clearest message that came through from what participants shared with us is that oftentimes they just don't feel respected, or the clinician doesn't understand what they're saying. They don't understand what this clinician's saying. So how can being engaged in clinical research help to improve that?
So going back to where you started with the patient-reported outcomes, the ones that this community has helped us to develop, and they're being tested now to see if they're actually reflecting what patients feel properly, actually ask about the things that the patients have told us are important, but they may not be things that ever end up in a publication in an academic journal written by doctors for doctors, because we're probably looking at the science side. We're probably looking at the things that we can fix, because doctors like to fix things, and we're not necessarily focusing in the right way on the things that matter, like whether you can walk far enough to get your groceries in the supermarket, whether you can actually stand up for long enough to, as a football match, say, if you've got the energy to stand up and sit down and keep shouting hurrah when your team is doing well. We never ask about things like that, but those might be the things that actually matter to the patient. They may not be hugely concerned, and I'm very conscious that I'm saying they and the patient, and I'm not in this situation, I'm not the patient, but that it may be that the dialogue improves because doctors learn from these patient-reported outcomes what it is that matters to patients and ask about those things, and then try to move the needle on those things rather than just the things that we measure or just the things that we fix, which does make us feel happy fixing things. We like to do good in that way.
Yeah, well, this is a case where it really extends to optimizing clinical care, right? To building a stronger relationship between the healthcare providers who take care of the mitochondrial disease patients and the patients themselves. And, the stronger that relationship is, the better the understanding, the more likely that, the doctor can help the patient, and the patient can feel confident that what they're sharing is being heard. Right, it's being translated into research. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. So maybe as we get near the end here, and I want to thank those in the audience that did submit questions today. Thanks for providing the update on your clinical trial. Of course, congratulations on opening that up and beginning to recruit patients. You mentioned 9 sites in the United States, but this is, of course, an international study, and some of our participants or those watching today may be outside the United States. So I know there are a number of sites outside the United States. I don't know if you have the details on the exact number, but we should encourage those outside the United States to look to the study information as well.
Thank you. We've got 39 sites running in 13 countries, predominantly outside the US, predominantly in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand. So we have got quite a wide spread, and I would be delighted if patients inquired and find out whether the sites are near them.
Yeah, that's the great thing about ClinicalTrialsgov is it does capture all of those sites, not just those in the United States. And there are times when we know ClinicalTrialsgov isn't the easiest way for a patient to digest the information or learn about a trial. That's what we're really trying to improve with our clinical trial finder, is take the complex ClinicalTrials.gov and turn it into an easy searchable engine that will point you immediately or as quickly as possible to a site close to you where you can find out more to see if you're actually eligible for that trial. So we do encourage all of the patients that are watching this to take that step to at least research what's out there and what might be relevant to you. And Dr. Davies, I'm sure you would agree with another point we always emphasize is this should be a decision that patients shouldn't feel like they have to make on their own, but in close consultation with the doctors that take care of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah, so as options increase, it's really important that you speak with your doctor about your mitochondrial disease, your situation. They're aware of the underlying issues you may be dealing with, but they can also make recommendations as to which studies may be the best option for you. So please do involve your doctors in those discussions as well. So I think with that, we're going to draw it to a close. I don't know if you had any final comments you wanted to share with our audience today.
Just that having relatively recently joined this community, I'm just blown away by the support we've already seen from the patients themselves, from their carers, and also from the advocacy groups such as UMDF. And thank you very much once again for inviting me to speak today.
Well, you're very welcome. We very much appreciate the time. And as even for myself, someone who's been involved with this community now for 15 plus years, it's really an exciting time to be able to share with our patient community these educational opportunities around clinical research and ways they can become involved. And we really look forward to future interactions and hearing more about the progress of the Reneo clinical trial as well. So thank you again, Dr. Davies. And with that, I'm going to end today's meeting. Again, everyone, please do your part during World Mitochondrial Disease Week to raise awareness, to share, to demonstrate to those around us how important this disease is and what the huge unmet medical need looks like. Please know that UMDF is here with you in partnership. And if we can help in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, everyone.